Tama queremos sala. What's
Obscure video game to animated show adaptations. For the last 4 years, they've become a consistent topic that I touch upon on this channel. Call it a dumb clutch for me to think of a video idea, or a coincidence that extended to something else. The fact of the matter is that I've always found these obscure game adaptations really interesting in the way they're executed. From when they started to where we are now, these types of shows always fit into one of 3 categories. The shows that adapt their source material word for word with little to no changes, the shows that have the same characters and story from the games they're adapting but has enough changes to make it its own unique experience, and the shows that take the world and characters from the games they're adapting, yet contain a completely different story. There's probably a lot more categories that I'm forgetting about, but those are the most common ones. But that's enough exposition for now. Alright, what game series am I talking about this year? Huh. And just when I thought I couldn't be less of a virgin. Persona is one of those franchises that for the longest time I had little to no interest in. With how critically acclaimed each game is, and as a fan of traditional turn-based RPGs, this would seem like something right up my alley. So eventually I tried Persona 4 Golden when it first came out on PC, and I gave up on it almost in the middle of the first proper dungeon of the game. Listen, I was 15 at the time, and I had more pressing matters to focus on. So eventually I just left it on my list of stuff that I would eventually finish. Cut to 2024, I started working on a project that was meant to come out last year, and out of pure instinct, I decided to buy Persona 3 Reload, and yeah, I ended up really liking it. So for the last few months, I spent my time playing all 3 modern Persona games, and I ended up really loving all of them. Are they perfect? No, not really. But with every 1 or 2 flaws each game has, comes 5 incredibly strong aspects I can think of just at the top of my head. And thanks to the uber instincts of my uber autism, I naturally wanted to experience more media that the Persona franchise had to offer. Luckily, with the rise of the franchise's popularity over the last few years, it grew to have tons of adaptations, such as stage shows, manga, and as you can probably guess by now, it had its fair share of animated adaptations. Though for this video specifically, we'll be going over the 2 most well-known adaptations, Persona 4 the animation, and Persona 5 the animation. Maybe someday I'll talk about the 4 series of movies Persona 3 had, and as for the 10 people that are gonna ask me about Persona Trinity Souls, hey, just be happy that I'm acknowledging that it exists. Heading into these shows, I already knew that they weren't going to hold a candle to the games they were based on. After all, trying to condense a game series that's famously known for taking 100+ hours to beat into a 26 episode series is already a tough task in and of itself. And after watching both of them, I was pretty shocked with how different these shows were quality-wise. Because on one hand, you have an absolutely incredible adaptation that, well, yes, isn't as good as the game it's based on, does a great job capturing what made its original counterpart so special in the first place while being entertaining on its own. While the other is Persona 5 the animation. Yeah, if you know anything about the Persona anime adaptations, it's pretty well known that the latter has a reputation of being not very good, while the former is pretty well liked. So what exactly does one do right that the other fucks up completely? Well, there are multiple reasons, and I figured it'd be fun we go over them in this video. Also, I know I already mentioned it in the start of this video, but spoilers for all the modern Persona games. But I guess if you made it this far into the video, then you've already played them or don't care about spoilers. So with that said, let's get into the confusing world of Persona the animation. And what's a better way to start things off by addressing the, elephant in the room first.
This can't be from... Are you serious?
Oh boy, time to kick a horse carcass that's been dead for over 7 years now. One of the most important aspects an animated adaptation has to get right has to be, well, its animation. Persona's always had this visually pleasing style in each of their games. Although being almost 20 years old, Persona 4 has a nice TV aesthetic, whether we're talking about its menu or subtle things like a static TV every time you're in the TV world. Then we have Persona 5, which is a game famously known for its visual style. I don't think I need to elaborate on what makes it look good, you're looking at the screen. So I guess it goes without saying that if there was an anime adaptation of these games, then keeping its visual style should be one of its main priorities. Plus, the games themselves sometimes have animated cutscenes, so if those are anything to go by, then the animation of the show should be somewhat in par with those. Right? Well, for Persona 4, I can say that its animation is for the most part pretty good. Not anything necessarily great or impressive. For example, there could be a really cool fight scene between the investigation team's Persona and a group of shadows, only for it to cut abruptly to showing them standing around not doing much, which somewhat kills the tension, and sometimes the characters look slightly off model, but those are just tiny nitpicks. The show still contains some pretty fluid animation, its comedic timing stays on point, and for an anime from 2011, its use of lighting is really appealing to look at. From the somber and creepy tone of When It Rains to the more lighthearted feeling of summer, it manages to encapsulate the atmosphere shown in the game. Or at least what it can. Remember, this is a PS2 game. So while it's not the best looking show, I can at least say that the anime looks as good as far as the animated cutscenes from the game, and they hold up pretty well in today's standards. Now compare that to Persona 5 the animation.
I'm not. This is some dumb shit.
Look at this.
By far one of the most talked about aspects about Persona 5 the animation is... well, take a wild guess. Now, to defend it for just a second, I knew that the show was never going to contain the sauce its game counterpart had. The game took a while to release, and the cutscenes were just that. Cutscenes. This is a show that was worked on the likelihood of 2, maybe 3 years. And considering that the anime studio behind this adaptation, Cloverworks Studios, was separated from another Japanese animation studio, A1 Pictures, and the fact that they were working on a total of 7 animated shows at the time, it's safe to assume that it was rushed in a lot of areas. Okay, that was being too generous. It was rushed in every conceivable area. The fight scenes and character movements look janky, the lighting and coloring look incredibly bland, and the characters get off model consistently more than they are in model. In fact, that's probably my biggest complaint with the show's animation. While the characters look and sound the same as in the game, something about the art direction just feels off. It looks like it's trying to replicate the style that was present in vanilla Persona 5, but doesn't understand what made that style look unique in the first place, while having a huge level of inconsistency. The fight scenes are probably the biggest example I can point out. Now, credit where credit's due, at the very least they tried to involve the Phantom Thieves in the fight, but the problem arises from both the fight choreography being half-baked and its visuals looking muddy. I mean, take a look at the all-out attacks. In the game, not only do they look fantastic, but they also capture the personality of each respected member of the Phantom Thieves. In Persona 5 the animation, on the other hand, the all-out attacks don't look good. Like, the animation of the thieves attacking the shadows looked bad enough, but the splash screen in the end just adds the cherry on top of how low effort everything looks. And then there's the abundance of 3D animation when they fight each palace ruler, and the less I say about that, the better. I think the most disappointing aspect about the show's animation is that if the show didn't get rushed and if it had more creative liberty, we could have had a better looking show. Don't believe me? In 2016, A1 Pictures released an animated special to celebrate the release of Persona 5 called Persona 5 The Daybreakers. It's around 24 minutes and it loosely adapts a Mementos mission from the game, and off the rip you can tell that the animation is a huge step up from what it would become. Like, come on, look at this. The fight scenes look sick, the lighting looks better, the character models... you know, it could be better, but it's a step up. Granted, it is unfair to compare what's essentially a commercial to a show that was most likely rushed, but my point is that if it was given enough time and money, the show could have looked a lot better. But what we ended up getting is a sloppy looking show that tries to mimic its game counterpart and failing exponentially. And even with that aside, the Valentine's Day OVA had better animation than the show too. Like, are you really gonna sit there and tell me that the animated special of Joker going on dates with all the girls was a bigger priority than the 2 movies meant to wrap up the last 2 arcs of the base game? I mean, you have to be a real degenerate if you think that.
年下になんて全然興味なかったのに。
You know what, we'll put a pin on that conversation and come back to it on a later date. Alright, got the obligatory bullshit people were expecting me to talk about out the way. Let's get into the actual interesting stuff.
Thousands died, but tens of thousands have mourned in their place. Minion Maker!
Playing protagonists in RPGs are pretty neat. They serve their purpose of having the player insert themselves into the game, but also giving glimpses of what their personality outside the player could be. Unfortunately, this archetype doesn't really work with a show like this unless you really hone in on giving them their own personality. In the case of Persona 4, its main character, Yuna Arakami, is probably the weakest main character of the 3 modern Persona games, at least in their respective debut game. This of course doesn't mean I hate his character. The sprinkles of personality he has from his dialogue options and his actions in-game characterize him well enough, but more or less he's meant to bounce off the characters he meets along his journey. To simply put, he's just a chill guy who's willing to be there for his friends. Now compare that to the show, where Atlus decided to randomly lock in and make this one of the best characterizations a Persona protagonist ever had.
I'm the king. You suck.
If you've ever heard of Persona 4 the animation, you are most likely aware that one of the most beloved aspects about that show has to be Yu Narukami. And a majority of that love stems from all the Chad jokes people make about him, and while yes, they are pretty funny to an extent, a lot of people just dumb him down to those aspects and those aspects alone, which is a shame because he unironically has one of the strongest arcs not only in the show, but in the entirety of Persona 4. Yu's arc throughout the show is about his insecurities of being alone. Unlike the game, where it makes it pretty clear that he was well liked back in his hometown, the show retcons that within the first episode. Ever since he arrived in Inaba, Yu was a lot more socially awkward and reserved, with a flashback showing that even back home, he didn't make any meaningful connections with his classmates. It's only when he gets involved with the murder mysteries and gains his persona when he begins to feel a lot more confident in himself. He begins to open up to the various people he meets in Inaba, especially when it comes to his family and his fellow members of the investigation team. But that lingering feeling of loneliness is always within him, and this is shown beautifully in episode 12, It's Not Empty at All. The episode serves to adapt the 4th dungeon of the game, but instead of just fighting Shadow Mitsuo, the episode suddenly cuts to a completely different scene after he's introduced, with the investigation team celebrating his defeat but wondering what will happen next. Months pass by and the group begins to drift away. Rise moves away without telling anybody. Teddy returns back to the TV world. Kanji just kinda does his own thing outside the group. Yukiko gets busier working in the Amagi Inn, and Chi and Yosuke focus more on their college entrance exams. Even though their lives are back to normal, Yu's anxiety of being alone increases with each scene, as the purpose of his friend group existing in the first place is now gone. Later it's revealed that all of this was just an elaborate illusion by Shadow Mitsuo, showing Yu a false, empty reality where they caught the killer, which creates a really interesting conflict. Does Yu really want to catch the killer for the sake of finding out the truth, or as a way to avoid being alone again? It's only when he escapes this reality thanks to Yosuke when he realizes that the bonds he's made with his friends are real, that no matter what happens throughout their journey, and even after they capture the killer, that they'll always stick together, that he's no longer empty. This episode does a great job elaborating on Yu's insecurities, where it could have ended there, but the OVA that adapts the true ending of the game manages to bring a phenomenal conclusion to his arc. Granted, a lot of it does follow the same beats as episode 12, but with the exception that instead of having the group drift apart, Yu is just stuck in a reality where he relives the same day, and while he acknowledges this, a side of him wants to stay like this forever. Eventually he snaps out of it thanks to Margaret, which eventually leads to him confronting his own shadow. Now for context, all the main characters in the game have to face their shadow, a manifestation of their deepest insecurities that they hide both from the public and themselves. Considering that he's a blank slate in the game, Narukami didn't have one. The show puts an interesting spin on it because unlike the previous shadows where the team had to fight them head on, there isn't a fight against Shadow Yu. He takes the form of a stack of TVs expressing his fears of living in a future without his friends, but in the end, he accepts the shadow. It turns back into his starter persona Izanagi and defeats Margaret, coming to terms that while he may be apart from his friends, the memories that he made with them will never be forgotten. There's a lot more I can bring up with Yu's characterization in the show. His interactions with the people he meets being more fleshed out, perfectly balancing his calm, emotional, and funny moments as the story progresses, Yana Yangbachi's incredible voice performance, and if I were to talk about episode 22 and 23 here, then we'd be here all day. Out of everything that came out of the show, Yu Narukami being the best part of it was something I wasn't expecting, but ended up adoring in the end. And apparently the people at Atlas did too, considering that every Persona 4 spin-off takes inspiration from his portrayal in the show, which says a lot if you ask me. But now we get to the damn brat that got sued.
Damn brat! I'll sue!
What a show-off. You're so reckless, you know that?
Joker for Persona 5 is my favorite protagonist from the 3 modern Persona games, which yeah, is probably a generic take, but can you blame me for thinking otherwise? Look at this dude. If I ended up making his character design, then I'd be putting him everywhere too. But outside of his design, Joker also had the blueprint for his character to be expanded on in an adaptation like this. His characterization within the game portrayed the side of him in the real world where he's a bit timid but occasionally being a troll, and the side of him in the cognitive world where he's a lot more enthusiastic, cocky even, but always caring about others and keeping his rebellion sense of justice against the corrupted authorities that wronged him. While he's the most talkative out of the Persona protagonists within their respective games, he was still a blank slate, so not a lot of development could be done. So Persona 5 the animation could have been the perfect opportunity to make him a better character. So dear viewer, allow me to ask you this. How in the fuck is it that the anime adaptation manages to contain the most bland interpretation of his character?
Welcome! Hey, are you old enough?
Joker, also known as Ren Amamiya in the anime, is more of a blank slate here than in the game where he's purposely a blank slate. My biggest problem with the guy is that he's just so boring. He feels exactly the same whenever he's in the metaverse or in the real world. Most of his dialogue aligns to nothing or the most generic protagonist line you could possibly have, and due to the show's abysmal pacing, which don't worry, we will get into, he barely, if at all, has a character arc. Outside of his interactions with Akechi and a few funny moments here and there, he literally has nothing going for him. From start to finish, he ends up being the same guy. And that's such a waste of potential because he had the chance to be a better protagonist than you. For example, I think it would have been really interesting if we got to see him dealing through his trauma. I mean, after saving a woman from a political figure who then decides to falsely sue you, which then leads you to having a criminal record and then move away for a while to a new place would definitely fuck somebody up. And while the game tackles this area in the best of its abilities, the anime could have had the perfect opportunity to introduce a storyline like this. Think about it. In the start of the show, Ren would be the type of person to keep his head down after the incident with Shida to avoid getting himself in further trouble, even if something seems unfair. But the moment he reaches the metaverse and gets his persona, it's like a switch flips in his head. Suddenly he becomes a lot more confident about his sense of justice, and throughout the first half of the show, he would have to balance his normal everyday life, but for the most part, Ren would treat being a phantom thief like how Ryuji was for a good chunk of the game. But not for the sake of popularity, but rather as a way to cope. But as the series progresses and he connects with his peers more and more, he realizes that he wants to be a phantom thief to help others from the same injustices that wronged him. It would be a slow burn that would eventually come to its conclusion around episode 22 when they adapt the end of Mishima's arc, where you could see a bit of the person he was in him, and that's why he chooses not to change his heart. There's a lot more you can do with that, especially when you get around the final 2 arcs of the game, and perhaps we could have also gotten some insight through Ren's past and home life because we get little to no information about that within the game. Does it sound somewhat similar to what you went through in P4 the animation? Kinda. But tell me that doesn't sound more interesting than what the show gave us. In fact, Joker has had this issue throughout the spin-offs as well. From Strikers to Tactica to Dancing in Starlight, he's been stuck without a canonical personality. And you want to know what's worse? This was done intentionally. According to an interview with Persona character designer, I'm not even gonna attempt saying his last name. The name is in the fucking screen. Don't crucify me in the comments. I don't give a shit. He mentions that they went quote unquote too far with the Persona 4 protagonist based on the community's interpretation of him in the spin-offs. And with all due respect, that's kind of dumb. The reason people liked you is because he was given a personality. And instead of embracing that with Joker, they doubled down and made him boring. But hey, at least they gave him some personality in the non-canon Japanese exclusive gacha game. Only took him almost 9 years to do it, but you know what? It's better late than never. Anyways, now we can get on to the story, more specifically the pacing. By far the biggest problem within these 2 adaptations is the pacing, and as I've mentioned in the start of the video, this is not a surprise. And as you could probably expect, Persona 4 the animation does a better job than this than Persona 5 the animation. How exactly? Simple! By the way that it's structured. Persona 4's story is pretty simple, or at least as simple as the series is ever going to get. A murder case arises in the small town of Inaba, so it's up to you and the friends you make along your journey to find out who's behind the cases, where the mysterious fog surrounding Inaba comes from, while balancing your life as a regular teenage boy. Like I mentioned, Persona 4 is probably the most simple out of the 2 games, but it makes up for it by having a really engaging mystery, while also having a cozy atmosphere. At least when we aren't focused in the serial murder case. But by far the most important aspect of the game has to be the characters. There's a reason why so many people consider this game to have the best cast in the franchise. The chemistry that the main cast have with each other is so much fun to watch, and by the end of the game, as cheesy as it may sound, it feels like you made a real group of friends. You could say that the real Persona 4 were the friends we made along the way. On average, finishing Persona 4 takes around 116 hours to fully complete, which definitely isn't anything to scoff at, so color me surprised when I say that the anime manages to have really good pacing. As I alluded to at the start of the video, while Persona 4 the animation adapts the story of the game to its entirety, it also manages to contain completely new elements that make it its own unique experience. But as you could expect, it doesn't necessarily have the time to adapt everything on a timely manner. Case in point, social links. While an important part of the franchise's identity, it would have been impossible to to give every social link their own dedicated episode. So they either had to get one episode with multiple social links or one social link during a random episode. Sometimes it was handled pretty well. For example, episode 3 focuses on Ai Biharu, the Moon Arcana, as well as Ko and Daisuke of the Strength Arcana, with both social links being mixed into one pretty entertaining episode. Then there's some episodes that I wish had their own dedicated episode, but due to time constraints were cut down drastically, like a majority of the investigation team and Naoki Konishi of the Hangman Arcana getting a somewhat forced cameo during the camping trip episode. And then there's some episodes that, in theory, should have been a mess pacing-wise, but managed to be amazing execution, like the two-parter, A Stormy Vacation. The first part involves an anime original story following Nanako as she does an investigation of her own, trying to figure out why Yu is coming back home so late. It's a charming and cute episode on its own, but doesn't really adapt any social link. That's where part 2 comes in, where it focuses on Yu taking on a variety of part-time jobs as a way to get Nanako a new umbrella. You want to take a guess as to how many social links this one singular episode adapts? 5. This episode adapts 5 social links, and it manages to connect them all perfectly. Granted, these social links weren't really that special. Hermit, Tower, and Death were fine enough links. Temperance was incredibly annoying. And the Devil's the worst social link in the series, so seeing it get a little screen time is fine by me.
She belongs to the streets.
Now, it's not to say that this show has perfect pacing by any means. Especially around the last few episodes, it can feel like things are moving pretty fast. But at the very least, I can say that this show paces itself pretty well. Persona 5, on the other hand, is a completely different story. Now, I want to preface this by saying that the show was made before Royal, so stuff involving the third semester arc like Dr. Marki and student named Yoshisawa are not present here. But even then, this game contains more than enough content to work with. Perhaps a little too much. With the game clocking around 100 hours to beat on its own, and to fully complete it, you know what? The gap in uploads starts to make a lot more sense now. Considering that, and the fact that P5 has a completely different tone and story arcs, the fact that they were stuck with 26 episodes was pretty much setting them up for failure. At the very least, this show needed more than double the episode count to properly tell its story and do something unique as well. But as I also alluded to at the start of the video, the show wants to retell the story of the game word for word, bar for bar, with little to no change. As a result, we're left with a show that sometimes moves faster than a crackhead on Adderall and sometimes slower than Drake after getting shot in Degrassi. The story of this game is intact here, but strips anything that makes it unique and fun to experience. Every scene shoots exposition to you left and right. The emotional moments don't hit as hard because you barely had the time to process what just happened, because now you gotta worry about this part. It's like watching a speed run, but I guarantee that'd be more entertaining and less messy to watch. To put it into perspective, the Kamoshida, Madarame, and Futaba arcs last around 4 episodes each. Then we have the Kaneshiro and Sai arc, which lasts around 3 episodes, and then there's the Okumura arc, which lasts a pitiful 2 episodes. Seems like I'm missing something? Don't worry, I'll get to that in a little bit. In total, that's 20 episodes dedicated to the palaces, with only 6 remaining episodes, which are used to implement an event that happens in the game, like the Hawaii trip or the school festival, or to adapt the Confidants. So with that in mind, you really want to take a guess into how well the Confidants are handled here? Spoiler alert, they fucking suck! Just like P4 the animation, P5 adapts the Confidants by either mashing existing Confidants into their own episode or putting them in a random episode. However, this show also decides to add in 2 more aspects to the way Confidants are adapted, and I genuinely can't tell which one is worse. Because they either decide to adapt 1 Confidant per episode, or they just don't get adapted in general due to time constraints. Poor EY gets relegated to a background character that shows up for 5 minutes and never again. Kawakami and Chihaya get turned into jokes, and Hifumi, Oda, and Yoshida show up at the end of the show, so they get nothing, but that doesn't stop them from at least trying to force their arcs in somewhere. Nah, let's give more focus to Oya instead, cause that's definitely something the people were clamoring for. And as you can expect, some of the Confidants that did get their own episodes are just bad. Take Yusuke Makoto's Confidant as an example. Yusuke is my favorite character in the game, and a huge part as to why has to do with his Confidant. A story about an artist trying to rekindle his passion is something that I heavily relate to. While this was one of the better episodes of the show, it still wasn't good because they decided that, hey, Yusuke's story wouldn't be that interesting on its own, let's add in an Akechi side plot just for shits and giggles. yeah, the pacing wasn't that good. Unlike Yusuke though, Makoto easily has one of my least favorite confidants in the game. Her character by herself was fine, but tell me why 9 out of the 10 ranks have to do with this random girl she became friends with, when her rank 1 had a perfect setup to what her confidant could have been, while other ranks have sprinkled of interesting tidbits about her family situation. Now this would have been the perfect opportunity for the anime to give us something completely new. Who am I kidding? They stick 1-to-1 with the original. The only confidant on the show that I think was somewhat done pretty well was, funny enough, Mishima, and it's because his confidant isn't just one episode. There's plenty of scenes in the show that build him up pretty well. So good job Persona 5 the animation, you managed to make 1 out of the 21 confidants in the game somewhat good. And then there's the tone of the show, which changes so drastically from 1 minute to the next, you'd be convinced that Kanye West worked on it. 2018 Kanye though, if this was modern day Kanye, then the show would have been cancelled after episode 1. To show you exactly what I mean, allow me to introduce episode 24, A Challenge Must Be Won. Now to this episode's credit, the way it integrates Akechi to the story is much better handled here than it was during Yusuke's episode, but just like before, that isn't the main conflict of the episode. Rather, it focuses on Futaba's uncle forcing Sojiro to give him custody money for Futaba. That's right, we're adapting Sojiro's confidant in this episode. Why do I sound excited? This episode sucks. Not because of anything to do with his confidant, it was handled as well as you expect, but rather the episode also decides to integrate the part of the story where Sojiro finds out that you are a part of the Phantom Thieves. Out of everything to come out of Persona 5, I always found this scene to be incredibly underrated. The tension of the dialogue, the emotion of the voice cast, everything about this scene is brilliant. How does the anime handle it? Sojiro chases Futaba for a little bit in the start of the episode, and then in the end when they address the card, Futaba explains herself like she's giving a school presentation, and then Sojiro's like, man, if you guys were hiding something from me, then you could have done a better job. I knew you guys were Phantom Thieves all along. Now here, have some curry.
Sojiro, what the fuck?
I know this sounds like such a nothing burger complaint, but it was something that was bothering me ever since I watched the episode. But honestly, that means nothing when we get down to the ending. Notice when I was talking about the number of episodes, I never mentioned the Shido or Mementos arc from the end of the game. Well, that's because the show on its own doesn't adapt them. The show ends with Akechi killing Joker at the end of Sai's arc, which on one hand is really fucking funny, and on the other hand, it makes me think about the reality where the show didn't have enough budget to make the 2 movies adapting those arcs, and it just ends on a cliffhanger. But yeah, unlike before the animation where it ends on the good ending and its OVA adapts the true ending, P5 the animation has 2-hour-long movies that adapt the finale of the game, and just like the rest of the show, it still manages to be extremely rushed and also extremely ugly. Listen, I know we're long past the animation segment, but I just wanted to point out how fucking putrid Shido looks. Oh my god. Alright, I think that about covers everything I have to say about each show. Surely there isn't anything I'm forgetting about, right? On a completely unrelated note, how do you guys feel about harmonicas? Yeah, if you weren't aware, in 2014, Atlas decided to release a 12-episode, let me repeat myself, a 12-episode series based on the enhanced version of the original Persona 4, Persona 4 Golden. Now you may be asking yourself, what was the point of this adaptation existing in the first place? And to that I have to say, how the fuck should I know? But regardless of its intentions, this is a thing that exists, and if you think I was harsh on P5 the animation, rest assured this show miraculously manages to be worse in every single aspect. First off, the animation. It took quite the dip in quality from its 2011 counterpart, and that's because there's a different studio behind the show. Instead of being produced by AIC Asta, our good old friends from A1 Pictures decided to work on this instead. Not only that, but the reason why it looks so bad is because they were working on 3 different shows as well. Nice to see that they kept up with their old habits 4 years earlier with the same IP. Listen, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, the animation in this show looks like dog shit. The movement in and out of battle looks incredibly janky. The characters get off model so often you think John Crispolucci was working on the show. The colors and shading look bad. By all accounts, this animation looks like a rush job. Then there's the pacing. This shit has 12 episodes. I want you to take a wild guess as to how well it's paced. While it technically tries to adapt the story of the game, the show is more like a highlight reel of both the original story as well as the new additions to Golden. One of the most prominent changes arises from Golden's newly added character, Marie. In the game, I thought Marie was fine. Her character arc was fine, her design was fine, her dungeon sucks. She's an okay character that I don't necessarily care about. So I kind of expected not to care about whatever she brought to the table in the Golden animation. At most, we get a 2, maybe 3 string of episodes episodes adapting her social link, add some new anime original stuff to make her inclusion somewhat more unique from the original game, and the finale would be her dungeon, followed up by Golden's true ending and epilogue. So what did we end up getting instead? I guess we did technically get all that, but I don't know, just put her in every episode, damn near every scene, and just expect the audience to like it. Fuck it, why not? With that said, what else can I really say about the show? It's more of the Persona 4 cast, so it could be pretty charming. Adachi's backstory was definitely something that happened. There wasn't an English dub for some reason, so I had to watch the sub, and overall the voice performances were fine. Oh, I really like the fight scene between you and Adachi in this version, though that's mainly because of the background track Yin Yang, and the Accomplice ending got its own OVA, which was a really neat addition. And, yeah, that's about it. The show sucks! The best way I could describe Persona 4 The Golden Animation is pointless. Why would you watch this when there's already an adaptation of Persona 4 that's animated that's miles better than this? If anything, the most I got out of this show is a sense of relief, knowing that Persona 5 never got an adaptation, because if it did and it got this level of quality, I would have been livid. This isn't the worst thing in the world, but I'm not gonna rewatch this anytime soon. So now that we got that out of the way, let's quickly head back to Persona 5 the animation. As I'm sure you've noticed throughout this entire video, I don't really like this show. At all. In fact, I think it's pretty damn bad. But with that said, I would be lying if I said that I didn't somewhat enjoy watching this. While there aren't many, I do want to point out some of the few decent things this adaptation does. By far, one of the best aspects about the show has to be the voice cast. My dumbass for some reason couldn't find the English dub of this show when I first watched it, so I watched it both subbed and dubbed. The voice cast for both really popped off, but I really loved the English dub. Special shout out to Sander Movis who played Ren. His character was incredibly boring, but at the very least he did give a good performance. The rest are the same from the game, so if you like them, then you'll like him here too. While the animation during the fight scenes look pretty bad a majority of the time, there are times where it can look pretty cool. And at times, the Palace Ruler fights have their own boss renditions that admittedly range in quality, but hey, credit where putting in some effort. But outside of that, yeah, I think that's about it. Wait! How could I forget the best aspect about the show? They made Akechi a more compelling villain! Outside of Yusuke, Goro Akechi is another contender of my favorite character in Persona 5. While a majority of the game he may look like the innocent but clever detective prince, as the game progresses, his true colors begin to arise, serving as the perfect antithesis to our group of heroes. He's been an outcast for his entire life and wants justice to be served. But unlike the Phantom Thieves, he's so fixated on his hate that he believes the best course of action is to become a part of the society that wronged him, helping his estranged father simply to get some semblance of recognition and validation before exacting revenge on him, not knowing that Shido would eventually betray him in the end. I could honestly go on another 10-minute tangent about why he's such a fascinating character, especially how he was handled in Royal, but that's a story for another day. What I want to highlight real quick is how he was handled within vanilla Persona 5. While many love his character, that wasn't always the case. Akechi's reputation when the game first came out were either you like him or you really hated him, and a major reason why was because the game often pushed him into the story, especially when it came to his original confidant, which was automated. The important thing to know, however, is that considering how forced his confidant was, it never really felt like Joker and Akechi made a meaningful connection. The game makes it pretty clear that they're both two sides of the same coin. They both come from similar backgrounds, they both have the wildcard ability, and before Akechi's boss battle, he even acknowledges that if they only met a few years earlier, they could have become great rivals, perhaps even friends, but knows that could never happen. He's made it pretty far into his plan and has no intentions of stopping, no matter the casualties. All that is great, but I just wish that the build-up to said moment was done better. Thankfully it was, thanks to Royal, completely reworking his confidant, no longer making it automatic. But Persona 5 the animation also changes the way he's built up in the main story as well, introducing him right in the beginning of the show in episode 1 and having him meet Ren for the first time in episode 5 in LeBlanc instead of the TV studio. In fact, after said episode, he starts to show up more frequently, either to establish his rivalry with Ren, or even the detective prince side of him that was barely touched upon in the game outside of the TV interviews he did. The scenes between Ren and Akechi are by far my favorite things about the show. Their rivalry here is shown to be more friendly, and their conversations feel natural, making his eventual betrayal at the end of the show feel a lot better paced, funny enough. Gone are the days of Akechi randomly trauma dumping about his dead mother in the middle of LeBlanc.
Apparently, my mother was in a relationship with some lowlife of a man.
Oh my god, I don't fucking care.
And then there's the OVA Proof of Justice, which is an anime original story where Ren looks back at the time he spent hanging out with Akechi while reflecting on his death. This is, no joke, the only thing that this anime does that I consider up to par with the game itself. It makes it pretty clear that, even though they saw themselves as rivals, they both had a mutual respect towards each other, treating one another as equal. And for the first time in the entire franchise up until that point, in a moment of vulnerability, Ren bursts into tears as he comes to terms that Akechi is really gone. I really don't want to take any guesses, but it wouldn't be a surprise if this version of Akechi inspired the one that we got in Royal. And while it's never going to top what the game did, this OVA is honestly such a great addition, and it makes me think, wow, this is amazing! Why couldn't the entire show have original stuff like this? Overall, while there are many things that this adaptation does badly, Akechi's characterization was something that absolutely got an upgrade to what it was before. Then I look at Adachi and I start wondering to myself, how the hell do you manage to fumble the same villain in both adaptations? While Akechi is by far the more interesting villain, I personally prefer the villain of Persona 4, Doru Adachi. After working hard throughout his entire life, only to end up getting a job at the quote-unquote boonies as an assistant detective and gaining powers from the TV world, Adachi decided that his life was so boring that he started killing people for shits and giggles. Throughout the entire game, he's shown to be your typical lousy detective, often saying things about the investigation that he wasn't supposed to, and giving our group small hints regarding the murder case while doing what he can to throw him off his trail. Just like how Akechi and Joker are two sides of the same coin, you can almost consider Adachi to be the shadow version of you. Where the latter took this new opportunity in his life to make bonds, the former isolates himself, blaming the world about how miserable his life is and hating everybody he encounters because he believes they are just as bad as he is. He has no tragic backstory, no real motivation outside of it's fun. He's just a lazy, manipulative asshole that wants to see the world devolve into chaos for his own enjoyment. And I'm not gonna lie, that's exactly why he's my favorite villain in the entire franchise. Because after all, what's a better foil to a game about sincerity and learning to accept your true self than a sadistic, empty person? Again, I could go on a much longer tangent about this cabbage-loving fuck, but nevertheless. In Persona 4 the animation, his role in the story remains similar to the game. However, he makes little to brief appearances. Up until his betrayal, he only shows up as comedic relief. He doesn't show up to give the investigation team clues or anything of the sorts. If anything, almost every scene he's in has him working with Dojima, which makes his reveal as the antagonist kind of out of nowhere. Hell, I argue that the show built up Mitsuha Namatame better up as antagonist than he did. But at the same time, I can't really blame the show for not doing much with the guy. In the original game, he really didn't have a social link, so I guess they couldn't come up with anything to do with him? Which could be bullshit because literally a year later after Persona 4 the animation release, Persona 4 Golden dropped, giving him his own social link which dives into his past as I mentioned previously, as well as showing how little he cares about making connections in Inaba. Even if there are small cracks to where he does appreciate the company, he keeps putting up a wall to prevent himself from getting attached. So how was he handled in Persona 4 the Golden animation? Well, he gets 2 episodes dedicated to him. Episode 6 follows his everyday life before and after the murder started, while slightly adapting his social link. Then there's episode 7, which adapts his rank 8, the fight against him, and it also shows his backstory before he started working in Inaba? Huh? I mean, they're kind of interesting, I guess, but like, why add this? The last episode gave us more than enough information about him. Seeing who he was before getting to Inaba was just kind of pointless. And that's it. After episode 7, he never shows up or gets mentioned again. I mean, I'm guessing they really needed that time to adapt the hot spring scene instead. Everybody's favorite part of any Persona game. Either way you look at it, you don't really win with Adachi in either adaptation. Because you either get the underdeveloped version of Adachi in Persona 4 the animation, or you get the rushed, they tried to do something with him in one episode but do nothing with him afterwards version of Adachi. The Golden animation especially had the chance to make his character more interesting. But he doesn't have a resolution with the investigation team at the end of his dungeon, and he doesn't even get a mention in the epilogue. Kind of funny how he demonstrates the best and worst aspects about the show, to be honest. Well, that was a longer tangent than I expected it to be. But let's return to the question I asked in the beginning of this video. What exactly makes one adaptation better than the other? Well, to put it simply, one was too focused on being exactly like its source material. Persona 5 has so much content that it'd be impossible to turn into an anime that's one season. As a result, we have Persona 5 the animation, a slightly entertaining, mediocre mess that ends up being a stripped down version of the game it's adapting. Persona 4, the animation, on the other hand, understands its limitations. So while it adapts the story, it acts more like a companion piece of the game, expanding on concepts that were either barely present in the game or its own interpretation. As a result, we have an adaptation that's both unique and faithful. If someone were to ask me if they should watch the Persona animes before playing the game, obviously I recommend playing the games, but even if you've already played them, I would still recommend P4 the animation. As for P5 the animation, just stick to the game and watch Proof of Justice. I'd only recommend the entire show if you were really interested in checking out a worse version of Persona 5. Then there's Persona 4 the Golden Animation, which shouldn't exist at all, but that's besides the point. Overall, while flawed in many areas, I had fun watching these shows, and when we do get the inevitable Persona 6 the animation, hopefully they take their time with it, or try doing something different than before. Anyways, this has been Manuel D, and join me in a few years when the eventual Metaphor Refantasio anime drops, and I talk about why it sucks. Or when Persona 6 drops in a decade.